Okay, I want you to close your eyes for a second. Just picture this.
Yep.
Imagine you're Nikola Tesla. The year is, I don't know, somewhere in the late 19th century. You're in your lab, surrounded by all these coils, electricity crackling.
Right, on the verge of something huge.
Exactly. And you're about to perfect wireless communication. You look out at this fractured world full of conflict, and you make this incredibly bold prediction. You say that this invention will abolish war.
It's such a beautiful thought, isn't it? And so optimistic, but also now just heartbreaking.
Because the logic feels so solid on paper.
It's totally bulletproof. War comes from misunderstanding, from distance, from thinking of people as the other. So if we can just talk to each other instantly,
When the borders just dissolve.
we'll understand each other. Conflict will just vanish. I mean, Giulio Marconi said basically the same thing about the radio in 1912. He thought it would make war, and he literally said this, impossible.
Impossible. That's a strong word. And, well, spoiler alert for anyone who's, missed the last century of history. They were wrong.
Tragically wrong. Just 2 years after Marconi said that, World War I kicks off. The bloodiest conflict humanity had ever seen at that point.
Now, here's the real kicker.
Yeah.
Some historians argue that the telegraph, that instant connection, actually made things worse.
Yours. Yes.
How is that even possible?
It's the speed. It's all about the speed.
Yeah.
Suddenly you have diplomats who are they're overwhelmed. The volume of these urgent messages flying back and forth was so high and arriving so fast that they couldn't process it.
There was no time to cool things down.
None. They had the connection, but they lacked the mental bandwidth to make sense of it. The friction was gone, and the war machine just rolled right over them.
Which brings us, maybe a little uncomfortably, to today.
Mm-hmm.
We're more connected than Tesla could have ever dreamed of.
Mm.
We have the internet, X, TikTok. I mean, the whole 24-hour news cycle. We are plugged into the collective brain of the entire species.
And yet,
if you just look at the state of our digital conversations, abolition of war is not exactly the vibe I'm getting.
not even close. It feels more like a constant, low-grade digital civil war. And that's the core problem we really need to dig into today. We're still operating on that old 19th century assumption.
That more connection equals more understanding.
Right. But the data we're looking at today suggests that connection, at least at this scale and this speed, might actually be the trigger for less understanding.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to try and figure out why this huge digital cocktail party feels less like a friendly mixer and more like an all-out brawl. We've got a really diverse stack of research here.
We really do. We're starting with a super detailed sociological look at a Polish Facebook group, then jumping to a heavy analysis of discourse during the war in Lebanon, and then zooming out to this huge cross-cultural comparison.
Right, comparing how China and the West handle emergencies online.
Exactly. We're going to see how we perform for audiences we can't even see, how our culture literally codes our emotional outbursts, and why frictionless sharing, the big dream of Silicon Valley, might be the poison in the well.
Okay, let's get into it. And I think we have to start with the design of the room itself. There's a term that always comes up in social media theory. Context collapse. It sounds technical.
It does, but it's really just about social awkwardness on a massive scale. Think about your normal life. You have different contexts, right?
Sure.
There's your work self. You show your boss. There's your family self for, your grandma. And then there's your Saturday night self for your friends. These are totally separate audiences.
And you keep them separate. I am definitely not telling my grandma about my Saturday night.
Of course not. But social media platforms, Facebook, X, all of them, they tend to just flatten all those audiences into one single networked public.
So you post something.
And your boss, your grandma, and your best friend all see it at the exact same moment. That's the collapse. The theory says this creates massive anxiety because you have no idea who you're performing for anymore.
It's that wedding nightmare scenario. You've got your work friends and your high school buddies and all your cousins in one room.
Yeah.
And you don't know how to act. You freeze.
That's the idea. But, and this is where our first source is so fascinating. A study by Jan Blomert and Gusia Sabla argues that this theory might be, well, a bit lazy.
Lazy. How so?
It assumes we're just passive victims, that the walls fall down and we just stand there looking awkward. But they looked at this very specific community, a Facebook group for Polish migrants in the Netherlands, and they found something different.
They found that people fight back.
And fight to rebuild the context actively.
We have to talk about Allah. She's kind of the main character here, right?
She is. So Ala posts in this group, she says she's a TV journalist, and she's looking for Polish people working in Dutch greenhouses to interview. A pretty standard request.
But there's a problem.
A big one. Her Polish grammar is a mess. The post is just filled with spelling mistakes.
Oh, no. And for a group that's centered around Polish identity, that's blood in the water.
It signals incompetence. The backlash is immediate. The first comment is polite, but the second one basically says, fucking great journalist who makes spelling mistakes.
Ouch. So the context collapses. She tried to perform professional journalist, and the crowd immediately relabeled her as idiot.
Yes. But the study is all about what happens next. Because they didn't just pile on.
They started to manage the chaos.
Precisely. The group members used the tools of the platform itself to impose order. They started using the reply function to create little side conversations. They weren't shouting at the whole group anymore.
They were pulling people aside for little arguments in the corner.
Exactly. Tagging specific people, calling out the trolls, defending Allah in these little subthreads. They were creating what sociologists call ratified groups, building little rooms inside the big one.
But the biggest move came from Allah herself.
It did. She saw what was happening, people thinking she was incompetent, and she didn't just delete the post, she edited it.
What did she add?
A little note in parentheses. She added that she had left Poland when she was 4 years old.
Oh, that changes everything.
It flips the entire script. She completely recontextualized herself. She went from being an incompetent journalist to a diaspora kid trying to reconnect with her roots.
And the hostility just evaporated.
Pretty much. The grammar mistakes weren't errors anymore. They were evidence of her life story. And then, for the actual interviews, she moved everyone to private messages.
She rebuilt the walls. So the big takeaway here is that we're not just helpless victims of the algorithm. We're constantly doing this digital manual labor.
Tagging, editing, sending DMs, all to keep the context from shattering. We're desperate for boundaries.
But that's a fight over grammar. What happens when the context is literally life and death?
And that's the pivot to our second source. It's a much heavier one. A study by Judy and Ayub on the hostilities in Lebanon in September 2024. They looked at how university students use social media during actual airstrikes.
So we're shifting from managing context to,
Well, what?
constructing identity.
I think that's right. When bombs are falling, you're not worried about your boss, you're worried about survival. And the study looked at the specific words, the linguistic markers, the emojis that students use to cope.
You'd expect it to just be pure panic. And sure, sadness was the top emotion, around 75%. Anger was high too, about 35%. But the numbers that jumped out at me were hope at over 40% and pride at 15%.
It doesn't seem to make sense, does it? Why would you feel pride when you're under attack? But this is where social identity theory comes in.
Okay, explain that.
In a crisis, your individual identity feels incredibly fragile. You feel small. So what do? You cling to your group identity. In this case, their Lebanese national identity. It becomes a shield.
So posting something hopeful isn't just about being optimistic. It's a form of defiance. It's saying, I belong to this group, and this group is strong.
It's a signal. I am still here. We're still here. And the study found something fascinating about how they posted. Most students didn't even write their own words.
They shared things.
They shared existing posts, songs, articles, images. They used what the researchers called borrowed voices.
Why? Is it just faster?
It's faster, but it's also, how do you even articulate that kind of trauma in real time? What do you say? So you borrow a song from Julia Boutros, or you share a slogan like, "We will not bow."
It does the emotional work for you.
It articulates the inarticulable, and the emojis were not just decoration, they were a language.
The bleeding heart and the Lebanese flag.
Exactly. They became a kind of visual shorthand, a hieroglyph for collective suffering and resilience. If I post that, I don't need to type out, "I'm terrified, but I love my country." The symbol does it all. It creates a collective consciousness.
It turns your solitary fear into a shared experience.
Right. But while the Polish group was fighting over their identity, the Lebanese students were fighting with their identity, using it as armor.
That's a great way to put it. But this is where it gets more complicated, because how we express that identity, the emotions we choose, that's not universal.
Not at all. It's heavily programmed by our culture. Which brings us to this huge comparative study by Guo and their team. They looked at emergency responses on social media between 2024 and 2025, specifically comparing X with Sina Weibo in China.
So this is like the nature versus nurture debate for the internet. Two platforms that are pretty similar.
Right. Short text, images, hashtags. but the users are running on totally different cultural software.
And the results are just staggering. Let's start with Weibo. That's a more collectivist culture with what they call high uncertainty avoidance. What does their response to a disaster look like?
On Weibo, during a fire or a plane crash, the emotional response was incredibly cohesive. You saw, high levels of fear and worry, of course, but the main positive action was collective wishing.
Words like pray, safety, resettlement.
Yes, the collective instinct is, the group is under threat, we need to come together, huddle up, and support the victims. High uncertainty avoidance means the culture wants to minimize anxiety by sticking to social norms and unity.
Okay, so that's one model. Now let's look at X. This is categorized as an individualist, low-power distance culture. What was the dominant emotion there during a crisis?
It wasn't fear, it wasn't sadness, it definitely wasn't prayer.
It was sarcasm.
It was sarcasm. 43.49% of the comments on X during these emergencies were categorized as sarcastic.
Wow. I mean, that's wild. Almost half the conversation is just people making snarky comments while the world is burning. It sounds almost sociopathic.
It sounds callous, I know, but you have to dig into the why, and that's where power distance explains it. Users on X, especially in the West, have low power distance. That means they don't have an inherent built-in respect for authority.
The gap between the leader and the citizen feels small.
Very small. So when a disaster hits, their first instinct isn't to pray for unity, it's to critique the people in charge.
So while Weibo users are saying respect to the firefighters,
X users are saying, great job, government. Maybe if you hadn't defunded the fire department, this wouldn't have happened.
they're assigning blame.
Immediately, they're talking about arsonists or climate change policy or government failure. The whole conversation becomes fragmented. It's a debate, not a vigil. Sarcasm is how they cope with feeling powerless. It's a way of saying, I see the system is failing and I refuse to respect it.
That is a huge aha moment right there. We spend so much time blaming the platform. We say, oh, Twitter just makes people mean.
But this data suggests the platform is just the stage. The script is written by our culture. We interpret the exact same type of disaster through completely different emotional lenses.
One sees a tragedy that needs unity, the other sees a systemic failure that needs critique.
Exactly.
But even with that cultural context, I think we can all agree the digital world just feels more and more hostile. It's not just sarcasm, it's venom.
It is. And that leads us perfectly to our last source, which is more of a psychological take from Nicholas Carr and his idea of the superbloom.
Carr really tries to get to the root of why we seem to hate our digital neighbors. And he starts by flipping a pretty standard psychological idea on its head, the proximity effect.
Usually the proximity effect is a good thing. The idea that living near people makes you like them more. Familiarity breeds fondness.
It's a small world idea.
Right. But Carr points out the dark side of that, which is environmental spoiling. Think about having a really annoying roommate.
Okay.
If you live really close to someone and they have irritating habits, they're loud, they're messy, you don't just start to dislike the habit, you start to dislike them. As a person, you resent their very presence.
And social media is basically a giant apartment building with paper-thin walls where everyone is shouting their worst opinions all day.
It's the ultimate digital crowding. We are constantly in each other's business. And then he brings in an even scarier idea. The dissimilarity cascade.
This one really got to me. The idea that the more you learn about a stranger, the more likely you are to dislike them.
It's the dating app problem, right? When you know nothing about someone, you can project all kinds of good things onto them. You fill in the blanks with similarities. But social media pushes us to constantly share everything.
We overshare.
Massively. And the research shows that when we see all that data about a person, our brains don't look for the similarities. We fixate on the differences.
So I might agree with you on 90% of things, but if I see that one post about pineapple on pizza or a political take I disagree with,
that's the one thing you fixate on. You go, oh, he's one of those people. And once you've labeled someone as dissimilar, the cascade starts. You start interpreting everything they do through that negative lens. The more they share, the more ammo you have to dislike them.
And the technology is designed to speed this whole process up. Carr talks about frictionless sharing. For years, we've been told friction is the enemy.
We want faster downloads, instant replies, zero lag. But human relationships, they need friction. Friction is the pause you take before you speak. It's the time it takes to actually understand context.
It's the diplomacy that prevents war.
Going all the way back to our WWI example, the telegraph removed the friction and the diplomats couldn't cope. When communication is too fast and too voluminous, diplomacy just it collapses.
We trade understanding for speed.
We do. And efficiency encourages snap judgments. We rely on our biases because we don't have the time to actually process the nuance of who Allah really is or why someone in Lebanon is posting a bleeding heart emoji. We just react.
This really connects everything. The Polish group members were trying to manually add friction back into the system.
Forcing people to stop, to read and edit, to move to a private message. They were building speed bumps.
And the ex-users, with their sarcasm, are just having a frictionless reaction to a constant, frictionless stream of bad news.
And this super bloom of connection is triggering our worst psychological instincts. We're social animals, sure, but we did not evolve to be in a room with a billion other people all shouting at once. That's not a village, that's a riot.
So we've gone from this Victorian dream of world peace to the messy reality of Facebook comments. We've seen how identity can be armor in a war zone and how culture decides if we pray or if we troll.
And the common thread through all of it is that just connecting people is not enough. In fact, without the right boundaries, without friction, that connection can be the very thing that tears us apart.
So here's the thought I want to leave you with. If frictionless sharing is the core of the problem, is the solution to intentionally make our digital lives harder?
It's a provocative idea, isn't it? We spend so much energy trying to optimize everything. Write faster, read more, scroll endlessly. But maybe the real act of rebellion, the real way forward, is to just slow down.
To read one thing deeply instead of skimming 10 things?
To wait an hour before you reply. To intentionally reintroduce the friction that all this technology was designed to strip away.
Be a little less efficient and maybe a little more human. Thank you for slowing down enough to listen to this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.
Take care.